Termo to Madeline, audio edition, page 54. We're reading about the murder of Sam Shaw. When Dick was confronted with this, and the other condemning evidence supplied by Captain Dick's wife and Charlie Fox, he finally broke down and confessed the whole matter. He blamed the whole affair on a white man, one A.B. Perry, who had died in his cabin on South Fork just 12 days after the murder on the plains. Dick claimed that Perry told him he would receive $800 from a certain rancher at South Fork if he killed Shaw. He supposedly offered to split the money with Holden Dick if he would help him. Dick then proceeded to tell how they had accomplished the gory deed and carried the head back to West Valley to be used as proof of their end in the contract at a later date. It seemed that the story could be plausible enough, and the authorities began to wonder if Perry maybe had been killed by the rancher who had hired him in order to silence him. Who was this rancher? Holden Dick flatly refused to tell that part of the tale. But he did tell enough other contradicting things about the crime that he soon had himself backed into a corner. It was becoming obvious that Perry, whom everyone knew as a local drunk, had no part in the killing either. Finally, Dick agreed to produce Shaw's head. He led Sheriff Ranchford and O.D. Weller out to the rock fence in West Valley. There, after a little searching and moving of rocks, a rotting bean sack was unveiled. Wood rats had been busy with it, and only a portion of the skull remained. Buckshot was visibly evident in the pieces of bone that were left. Evidently, the sack had not been completely empty the night of the murder, as it also contained a handful of beans. Holden Dick was transferred to Susanville jail the last part of February. Before that, however, he had told another story of killing a Chinaman only a few miles below where he had killed Shaw. Thus, another mystery had been solved. A preliminary hearing was held on March 6, 1885, at which Holden Dick's lawyer, C.G. Kelly, J.E. Raker, and E.V. Spencer entered a plea of not guilty in his behalf. However, he was held over for trial on a charge of first-degree murder. The trial got underway in Judge Marsteller's court at 10:00 a.m. on March 19, 1885, with E.R. Dodge and H.W. Ewing, both of Modoc County, doing the prosecuting. The entire day was spent in selecting a jury of 12 honest men as follows: Jacob Broadwell, I.W. Smith, John Parkins, G.W. Harrison, John Lowe, Henry Kirby, James Doyle, William Sifford, Charles Loomis, W.W. Kane, John Theodore, and J.R. Bailey. The following day, prosecuting attorney Dodge took the stand first and read a transcript of Holden Dick's confession. Then William Rogers was called to the stand, followed by Elmer Van Loan. Van Loan told of Shaw's activities up to the time he was last seen by white men. W.M. Roney, who had been with the first party of white men to arrive on the scene of the crime, took the stand. He identified a blood-smeared saw, which was marked People's Exhibit A, and told of the nauseating sight that he had witnessed upon arrival at Shaw's cabin. Following Roney was Charles Faulkner. Then Sheriff Ranchford was called to begin telling the story of Dick's capture and confession. His story was not completed that day, however, when it was necessary to adjourn the court for the day. Sheriff Ranchford was back on the stand the first thing Saturday morning. Some questions were raised by the defense lawyer as to the admissibility of Dick's confession and whether or not it had been given voluntarily. But the court allowed it to stand, and the prosecution rested. O.E. Bailey of Modoc County was the first witness called by the defense. He painted a dim picture of Ranchford's methods of obtaining the confession from Holden Dick. He was followed by Dick's wife, Emma, and then Holden Dick took the stand himself to testify on his own behalf. At this point in time, he was innocent of ever having harmed anyone. After Dick's testimony was heard, Sheriff Ranchford was recalled by the defense and allowed to testify concerning the confession. Defender Kelly tried mightily to find some flaw in his method, but Ranchford held firm in his account of the valid confession. O.E. Bailey was put back on the stand, and he went through some grueling cross-examination by Prosecutor Dodge. He, too, stood firm on his accusation that the confession was not voluntary. He maintained that it had been obtained under promises and threats, starvation and harassment. The judge allowed it to stand, even after Kelly had read the law concerning its admissibility. The court was adjourned until Monday, March 23rd. At 10 o'clock the morning, Ratchford was back on the stand to identify a rat-chewed skull, lower jaw bones, and other small pieces of bone, 4 pieces of lead, and several beans. This was all filed as Exhibit B. J.R. Leakey next took the stand to testify concerning methods of taking confessions that were legal. When he was finished, Defense Attorney Kelly asked the judge to strike out all of Ratchford's testimony in which Dick had told him he killed Shaw, quote, "I shot him," unquote, and all other admissions of guilt. This day the motion was granted. 2 more witnesses, John Bergstrom and Charles Fox, were then called by the defense. Their testimonies over the trial came to conclusion. It was after 5 o'clock when the attorneys finished up with their final arguments, and the court was recessed until 7:30 p.m. When everyone filed back into the courtroom at 7:30, it was dark outside, and the gas lights were flickering along the walls of the room. Judge Marsteller took a half hour to give the jury their instructions. At 8 o'clock, they solemnly filed out of the courtroom to consider their verdict in the jury's chambers. Everyone waited in almost total silence until they came filing solemnly back in at 9:20, after deliberating for a little over an hour. When the judge had determined that a verdict had been reached, he asked the foreman of the jury to stand and read it. J.R. Bailey stood and read in clear, forceful tones, quote, "We, the jury, in the case of the people of the state of California versus Holden Dick, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, dated this 23rd day of March, 1885, unquote. The only thing left to do that night was to set a day for sentencing. Then everyone filed out of the courtroom into the cold March air, and Holden Dick was returned to his closely guarded cell in the county jail. 2 days later, on the morning of March 25th, Holden Dick was ushered back into the courtroom. After a few preliminary statements, he was told to stand before the bench. Judge Marsteller, gazing intently into Dick's eyes, pronounced sentence. Quote, "Holden Dick, in accordance with the legal criminal code of the state of California, you have been prosecuted by the people of this state for the crime of murder. On the 4th day of March, 1885, you were arraigned in this court on an information filed and presented charging you with the crime of murder committed as follows. The said Holden Dick, on the 13th day of September, 1883, at and in the said county of Lassen and state of California, did then and there and feloniously, with malice aforethought, kill and murder one Samuel B. Shaw. Upon your arrangement of the said information, you entered the plea in the court that were not guilty of the offense charged, and you were placed upon your trial. 12 good and lawful men, selected under the provisions of the statute, after hearing the evidence of your trial, have declared by their verdict that you are guilty of murder in the first degree, the highest crime known to the law, and for which the jury have failed to determine the punishment. The law inflicts the penalty of death. Have you any legal cause to show why judgment should not be pronounced against you?" Unquote. Holden Dick stood silent and sullen, and no cause was given. After waiting a few moments, Judge Marsteller continued, quote, "My duty in this case is cold and disagreeable, but equally as plain. It is therefore ordered and decreed that you that said Holden Dick be punished by being hung by the neck until you're dead. And may the just and merciful God have mercy on your soul. It is further ordered that you, the said Holden Dick, be remanded to the custody of the sheriff of the county of Lassen to await the day of your execution." Unquote. And so it was that Holden Dick was taken back and placed in his cell to await his final day on earth. His attorneys filed for a new trial. That being denied, they appealed the decision to the Supreme Court of California. In the meantime, rumors grew and fermented all over Lassen County. People were not satisfied with Holden Dick's conviction alone. Who had hired him? That's the question. Who really was responsible for Sam Shaw's murder? Holden Dick didn't carry that gruesome head all those miles just for the sheer enjoyment of it. Who was the South Fork rancher he was supposed to show it to? Well, Holden Dick's lips were sealed. At least the responsible party was hoping so. Next chapter, titled William Moyer, Mule Skinner and Blacksmith. To begin with, people on the Madeline Plains, for some unknown reason peculiar to themselves, cannot pronounce the name Mower. The old-timers will remember William Mower, and especially his son, Ross Mower, but not by that name. Mower, it pronounced just the way it's spelled by the neighbors of the Madeline Plains in Lassen County, pronounced it Muir, or Muir. Anyway, just to set the record straight, the name will be spelled in its proper form, and the reader can figure out his own pronunciation. At any rate, William Mower first came west from Illinois in 1863 at the age of 18. He settled in Indian Valley in Plumas County, California. There he married Isabel Taylor in 1874. They had 3 children who lived to adulthood: Mary Isabel, Gertrude, and William Ross. In the first years of their marriage, William ran a train of pack mules from Indian Valley to Idaho via Susanville. He also packed freight into and out of Orville, California. As near as can be determined, he first moved to the Madeline Plains in 1885. In those years, there were several ways for settlers to acquire lands. A certain amount of land could be bought outright from Uncle Sam at $1.25 an acre under the preemption law. Homesteads could be taken up for little work and the sacrifice of living on them. Swamp and overflow land could be bought for $1.25 an acre, but in much larger acreages than the preemption claims. In fact, any amount of land that could be proved to be swamp could be bought under this law, and one could acquire a timber culture claim basically for living on it and promising the government to preserve the timber already there and promote its growth. William Mower bought what was later become known as Brockman. This was because of the fact that William Brockman eventually bought it from William Mayer. William Mayer got the title to the property under the United States preemption laws. This property, of course, lay at the foot of Mount McDonald and at the mouth of the 3-Mile Canyon, just a couple of miles southwest of Elmer Van Loan's place. At this time, William Mower filed on a timber culture claim a mile up a canyon toward McDonald Peak from Van Loan Creek. It was here that he moved his family into a log house, which he built from quaking aspen trees. And that was the exact of the timber on his timber culture, a few groves of quaking aspen trees. The Moyers lived on this property off and on in order to meet the requirements set down by Uncle Sam to obtain a timber preserve. The rest of the time was spent at Van Loan's blacksmithing, since William Mower was a blacksmith by trade. By this time, a little narrow gauge railroad called the Nevada and California Railroad, or the N&C, was pushing its way steadily northward out of Reno. By 1888, the terminal was located at Lassen, a station where the present-day town of Herlong stands. In 1890, the railhead was at Amity. Freighters and stages were leaving these points by the dozens, and many of them were winding their way across the Madeline Plains to Surprise Valley, Alturas, Lakeview, and other northern points. All the stages and freight teams headed to Alturas and Lakeview stopped over at the Van Loan Ranch. Elmer Van Loan had built a large two-story house to accommodate passengers and teamsters. There was a couple of huge livery barns built and corrals to accommodate horses and mules. Van Loan ran a first-class stage station. There was even the equivalent of the modern-day mechanic on duty. William Maurer, blacksmith, was there to patch up and fix any breakdowns in Van Loan's blacksmith shop. Breakdowns were plenty, and Mr. Maurer was kept very busy. No matter which way the freight wagons and stages came, they arrived after passing over miles of rocky, steep, and difficult roads. Horses lost shoes and had to be shod again and again. The metal wagon tires became loose on their wheels after hours of jerking and jolting and had to reset. Parts and pieces of wagons, both metal and wood, broke and had to be repaired or remade. The tugs on the harnesses broke and had to be spliced, all requiring an expert blacksmith. The Van Loan stage station and the west side of the Madeline Plains had just such an expert. Those old-time stage drivers and jerk-line teamsters were forever grateful for having a blacksmith of William Maurer's caliber to keep them a-rolling. Next chapter, The Lynching, a Mystery Still. Page 62.